Welcome to the V-Lecture channel. Posting this to YouTube as an informal way of electronically capturing some information that I've already distributed, either in a lecture or an article or otherwise. I'm hoping that the viewers, students in particular, will find the information useful for studying or focusing on a particular subject or project that you might be interested in. And sometimes, when you read a book or you take a class or you attend a lecture, it's difficult to kind of pinpoint some of the major topics that you need to focus on. And sometimes it's just difficult to concentrate at that particular time that you're studying. So I'm recapping, providing a quick summary of a few topics and labeling them as V-lectures. So I hope you find them interesting. This is the first one. And this particular one is going to be on supply chain management. It's not intended to be very detailed, but hopefully will help you if you're studying this particular subject to listen to some of the main topics that you probably need to focus on when you're getting ready for your midterm or final exams or trying to prepare for researching a particular topic or concept within this particular subject. Supply management. First, let's start with purchasing. That's usually the first thing that people think about when they think of supply management. And what is purchasing? What does that mean to you? Purchasing is usually one of the basic processes that are common in all organizations, much like human resources is. It's that process of acquiring goods and services and equipment from another organization and doing it in a legal and hopefully in an ethical way. You have to remember the progression that supply management has gone through to come to where it is today. There used to be a time when purchasing was just another collateral duty that someone within the organization did, and sometimes even depending on how small or large the organization is, it could be a couple of people within a division, it could be a division itself, or just the owner would take care of purchasing as another one of the main things to do for the organization. So when you think about purchasing today and how it impacts the bottom line of organizations, you can see how significantly it has progressed in terms of where do you think about purchasing in your strategic plan for your organization. Purchasing really has become a long way, as I said before, when we realize that it does has a significant impact on the bottom line. And most businesses, for-profit businesses, are in business to make money. So anything that significantly impacts the bottom line tends to become one of the top priorities of the organization. Purchasing, when you think about purchasing, there are really 5 main things that you need to think about. And that's you want to think about buying the right product or service that you need. Not necessarily the service or product that you want, but the service or product that you need. Also, the quantity in which you need to buy it, whether it's a one-time buy or it's a product that you can buy in bulk that would save you money over the long term, or is it an occasional buy? So quantity in which you're purchasing things also significantly impacts the cost of something. So you got the right product or service. You want to also buy the right quantity, as I just said, but there are 3 other things that you need to consider when you're purchasing, and that's the quality, the price, and buying it at the right time. So what do I mean when I say buying it at the right quality? Well, the quality of the product that you're purchasing can significantly impact your end product that you're trying to sell to your consumer or your customers. So the type of products, for example, when you're thinking about buying raw materials that will be used in the process of producing your product, you have to think about who are my customers and what level of quality am I offering them and for what price. Because depending on the level of quality in which you're trying to purchase something, that also significantly impacts the price. So what is the right price? The right price is what consumers are willing to pay for a particular product or service. right? And so you don't want to have to buy a product that you're going to use that essentially is going to put you out of the market. For example, if you're buying raw materials and the raw materials price of the raw materials exceeds the cost that you can charge the customer for your product or service, then you're pretty much already defeated your purpose of being in business. So buying things at the right price can also significantly impact your product or service that you're trying to offer to your customer. Purchasing at the right time. This is also something that is often overlooked, I'll say, in the world of purchasing. Buying things at the right time, you have to be in touch with the process in which you're producing your product or service, because you don't want to buy products that are going to sit on the shelf and not be used frequently, because now you're creating other issues that you now have to deal with besides producing your product or service. And some of those issues could be as simple as, how do I warehouse these extra parts that I'm not going to use for a month? Not only where do you store these, but now you have to pay somebody to watch these things in terms of security. And you also have to pay someone to continuously inventory or control those items. So not buying things at the right time when you know you're going to need them or use them can create other issues that you really don't need. And so let's recap the 5 things that I consider to be significantly important in terms of purchasing. The first thing I said, and we call these the 5 rights, by the way, in my discipline. So you want to purchase the right item or right service. You want to purchase the right quantity. You want to purchase the right quality. You want to purchase at the right price, and you also want to purchase at the right time. So those 5 things are important. Purchase the right item or service. Purchase the right quantity. Purchase the right quality. Purchase at the right price, and purchase at the right time. Okay. So we used to think about purchasing, as I said, in isolation. Today, people are more concerned with that wider aspect of supply management. The total life cycle of what you are buying, which is the total cost of ownership. So what does it mean when we say total cost of ownership? I like to tell my students to think about when you're purchasing your first car. You remember how excited you were that you were buying a car, and probably a guardian, a parent, or close friend, or someone you trusted, you looked to for advice, and one of the things they probably says was, don't consider just the purchase of the car, you got to consider the total cost of owning the car, not just the initial cost. So total cost of ownership considers all those things. So when you go to a car dealership and you negotiate a price, you also have to consider, what are the costs of taxes that I'm going to have to pay? What are the costs of registration that I'm going to have to pay? But all those are still initial costs of purchasing the car. But then you get the car home, and maybe 6 months later, 3 months later, there are also some maintenance costs that you incur, such as oil changes, putting gas in the car, washing the vehicle. All those things will, over the life cycle of owning the car, will be your total ownership cost. And also simple things as getting repairs done to the car. So there's a lot of costs that you can incur over the life cycle of having that particular vehicle. Okay, so those are things that we consider as total ownership cost. Supply management really is a 5-stage process, and a lot just goes into not just the initial purchase, right? So let's talk about the 5-stage process. if you will. So in stage one of supply management, you're identifying the services or the items that might be required. You're also in stage two looking at who are your potential suppliers. And then stage three, you're determining a fair and reasonable price. And then stage four, you establish some type of agreement with one of those suppliers that you reviewed. And then in stage five, you're managing that relationship with your supplier to hopefully enhance what you have agreed to get. So think of that 5-stage process. Sounds a little tedious, yes, but we often go through this 5-stage process. Some people processing that information faster than others, and most of us processing it without even knowing that we're going through a process, right? So think about purchasing the vehicle. We just talked about going to the car dealership for the first time and purchasing the car. So stage one, identify the item or service that's required, right? So usually you do a little research online. Maybe you go to the car dealership a few times if you're like me, and you kind of look around to see what would I like in a vehicle. And so if you're smart, you think about what's required, right? Do I have a family that I need to transport? Am I a single person? And maybe do I need a compact vehicle? Or do I need a sporty vehicle? Do I need an SUV? Do I need a truck? All those things and more should be helping you to determine what is needed. Okay, and sometimes we fall into that trap of what is wanted, right? And I just kind of encourage you, when you're working for an organization and you're the person who is responsible for purchasing, you'll more than likely have to keep the person who is requiring the services on track with knowing the difference between what is needed and what is actually wanted. And I like to use engineers as an example of being typical of describing what they want versus what they need. And I say this lightly, but and half-heartedly joking that engineers tend to want the best technology possible because they're trained to know that that the greatest and technology out there usually will give you the best performance. But you have to think about, do my customers really want the best performance? Or is there something in between the best performance and good enough that they're willing to pay for? Because remember, when we talked about earlier that the quality of your product does impact the end product that you're offering to your customer. So consider that. And also the quality impacts, in most cases, the cost that you're going to pay for those raw materials. So do I, using the car vehicle again as an example, do I really want to buy, do I need to buy a Mercedes to transport my family of 3 to and from destinations? Or would it be more feasible if I brought some other model, or an SUV, or a truck, or a compact vehicle? And what can I really afford, right? Okay, so stage one, identify that item or service that is actually required. Stage two, when you're identifying suppliers, you do the same thing when you're buying a vehicle, right? You take a look around to see, after you know what you need, there may be several car dealerships available to you in your area. And so what you would do is you basically would shop around, right? And you look to see who's going to be able to provide me the type of vehicle that I need, and also at the cost that I'm willing to pay for it, and who maybe would offer me an extended warranty, for example. And so you look to see what's available for you in terms of who can provide the product or service that you want. Stage 3, determine a fair and reasonable price. So this really is part of that market research that you're doing when you're looking around to see. A lot of us will look online to see what the market is bearing. For example, what's the majority of consumers paying for a particular vehicle, maybe a particular model, and even a particular year. And so from doing those comparisons, what we call market share or market research, you would determine what is fair and reasonable. It's the same thing when you're doing purchasing for an organization, right? So you go out, you may look through catalogs. Most days those are electronic catalogs. You may also do research online. You may actually go to some of the company websites to see what they're charging retail as well as wholesale, because remember I said the quantity is important. So if you can buy things in bulk that you're going to use on a scheduled basis, then it may be better for you to buy things in bulk. But remember, only buy what you can use and use in a reasonable amount of time. Stage 4, we said you want to establish an agreement with the supplier. Usually this is some type of service level agreement. It could be a contract, it could be some type of memorandum of understanding, it could be just a simple invoice, depending on how frequently and how simple or complex the agreement is. Stage 5 is managing the relationship with your supplier to ensure that you get what you agreed to get. So this is usually for if you're doing a one-time transaction, you're really going to have a transactional type relationship with your supplier where you're providing funds for a service or product, and you may never even use that supplier again. But if this is a supplier that you're using on a regular basis, you want to try to establish a relationship with that supplier. It's really to your benefit to create a win-win situation, whereas both parties have walk away with feeling as though they have been treated fairly. Because believe me, if you get over on your suppliers and this is someone that you become dependent on to provide you a product or services, they're not going to forget that they didn't get a fair deal. So try to maintain good relationships with your suppliers, and you'll be better off in the long run. Okay. Strategic sourcing is another concept that businesses are starting to focus on, and there's really 3 major activities in terms of strategic sourcing. You want to periodically, the first activity is periodically you want to analyze what is your organization spending, what and from whom they are purchasing. This is the same thing that you do in your personal life. You remember when you are getting a simple service such as cable, buying cable for your home, your residential area, and every now and then you kind of look at that bill and perhaps you see the cost rising slowly but surely, depending on how often you look at it. But you definitely try to periodically look at what you're paying for to determine if what you're paying for is what you actually need, because what you are purchasing last year may not be what your organization needs today. So you want to periodically do that analysis. The second activity of strategic sourcing is to do an analysis of your supply market. Who are the suppliers, and are there any current changes? You got to also be mindful that businesses, suppliers are in business as well, and so they change products and services too. So depending on how dependent you are on a particular item, you always want to be aware of what's going on with your suppliers as well. The third activity with strategic sourcing is developing your sourcing strategy to support your corporate strategy, which means you're going to minimize your risk and cost for your organization. And there are five M's, that what we call the 5 M's, that also need to be considered when you're studying supply management. And I'll go over what they are. What's important about this 5M concept, it's a very popular concept, is that corporations are focused on a goal to make a profit. Remember, for-profit organizations are in business to make a profit. So government and nonprofits are focused on meeting a need without a profit, but your typical business is focused on making a profit. And the 5 M's that they focus on is machines, manpower, material, money, and management. Our focus is, in the procurement area, is on the material portion of that. So because in today's society most organizations purchase materials from outside sources, so the function of procurement has become more complex and more important, right? Supply management is also important because it impacts that bottom line of an organization. Of the two things most likely to impact the bottom line is cost and sales. And guess what? When you're in the purchasing department, you impact both. Purchasing impacts the cost of your raw materials. It impacts the cost of the product that you're trying to sell. And the majority of an organization's costs can lie in the procurement department. So if your procurement department or your purchasing department is overpaying for raw materials, then you're not going to be able to be very competitive in the marketplace because you're already overpaying, which means that you're tapping into that profit margin. And remember, businesses are in business to make money, to make profit. So how does supply management impact sales? There are 8 areas. You want to be faster to the market. You want to improve quality. You want to have some price and flexibility. And you also want to stay on top of your innovation. You want to enhance your customer satisfaction. And you want to be the supplier of choice, right? And your customers want to have fulfillment flexibility as well. And I'll come back to that one because that one's a little not a typical one that you hear. And then you want to have shorter cycles and lead times. Okay, so customer fulfillment flexibility, what does that mean? That means that if you have a good relationship with your suppliers, then you can typically operate outside of that that contract that you have, in terms of if you need something that's not on your typical schedule of delivery, for example, and you call up your supplier and you say, hey, I know the contract says that you're not supposed to deliver until next Tuesday, but we really need these materials today if possible. Is there any way possible that we can get those materials today so that we can go to production and produce a product by the end of the week? And if you have a very good relationship with your supplier, they'll usually try to work with you. Okay, but if you have that transactional relationship that we talked about earlier, then they're going to typically stick to the contract, especially if they didn't feel like they got a fair deal. All right, remember that? Okay. So lower total cost of ownership is something that we strive to get, right? Because remember, we said total cost of ownership is that summation of costs and acquiring and owning and converting any item of material, piece of equipment, or service and post-ownership costs, including the disposal of hazardous and other material waste and the cost of lost sales as a result of a reputation for poor product quality caused by defective material or purchase services that are incorporated in the end product or services. So that's a typical definition that you'd find online or in any particular textbook that you might be reading about supply management. So basically, remember we talked about the total cost of ownership of owning a vehicle. It could also include, well, it should include the initial cost as well as the cost of maintaining something. But what we didn't mention earlier is that there's a disposal cost that may be also associated. Have you ever tried to figure out, what do I do with my vehicle when it stops the running? You know, what? You can't just leave it in your front. Well, you could, but you might get a ticket. So these are things you also have to consider, because even taking your car after you're done with it and it no longer runs, you have to pay somebody to come tow it away, and you have to pay somebody to dispose of it at the junkyard, right? Okay, unless you donate it, and that's a great thing to do. Okay, so the benefits of lowering your total cost of ownership. You have a better product design if you have a well-defined requirement from the very beginning. Your acquisition costs can be lowered by specifying the requirements. Standardization is another key, and we'll talk about those things in another video. Using good sourcing and pricing practices and maintaining good relationships, as we said. Thinking about your processing costs, your quality costs, your downtime costs, because you still have to pay people if you're not producing something, if you want to keep your workforce intact. So remember that also. Risk costs, cycle time costs, conversion costs, and non-value added costs, supply chain costs, and post-ownership costs. All those things are important. And also remember your return on investment. Every dollar saved in purchasing is equivalent to $1 of profit. Okay, through the process of acquiring goods and services and equipment from other organizations, a chain of upstream suppliers will form, and we call that our supply chain. Okay, marketing distribution is the downstream of value chain, which gets the product or service to your customer. So your supply system, that includes all your internal functions and your external suppliers. So don't forget, your suppliers are very important. Without those raw materials, you won't be able to produce a product. So your internal functions, and you know what they are: the operations department, your engineering, your production control and scheduling, all those, even your human resource office, all those things are your internal functions that help you from the beginning of your cycle of processing all the way to your end result of selling and delivering an actual product or services. Your value chain is that's the series of organizational activities which add value to your goods and services, flowing from beginning to the end of a process. And there are 4 key roles in the supply management profession. You don't have to just get pigeonholed into one area, but there's 4 major categories that you should know. There's leadership roles in seeking new opportunities in marketplace and following through. You also want to identify outside sourcing opportunities. Don't forget, you also have to manage those systems and relationships that you have. You want to also always be looking for new opportunities for your organization. So just because you're in the purchasing department doesn't mean that you don't have a strategic role in your organization. The way you procure and purchase, the way you purchase products and materials and services for your organization should always be in alignment with the strategic goals of the organization, and always looking for new and inventive ways to make your services that you offer to your organization better. So I thank you guys. I hope this was useful information for you, and hopefully it was relatively easy to understand. And if you want to see more videos like this one, click the like button below. I'm fairly new to YouTube. Doing this because my daughter really encouraged me. She says, I wish I really had someone like you, Mom, that would that could explain things in a way that were more relative to her. And so I had told her that I would try this for a little while, and hopefully it's helpful, and hopefully we'll be able to upload some more of the lectures for you. And I wish you guys a wonderful day. Thank you.